Welcome to tonight's episode of Healing Through Stories, where consciousness shifts to receive wisdom through narrative, and the space between sleeping and waking becomes a sanctuary for transformation. In the quantum field of possibility, where time bends and healing flows through the portal of imagination, your story begins tonight. There exists a realm beyond the boundaries of linear time, where healing stories emerge from the depths of collective wisdom and truth reveals itself through the sacred art of narrative. Tonight, consciousness prepares to receive a tale that speaks directly to the soul's deepest knowing, a story that will unfold like a gentle river of understanding, carrying you toward the shores of peaceful rest-on in this ethereal space where dimensions blend and awareness expands. We find ourselves drawn to a character whose journey mirrors the intricate dance between order and upheaval, between the familiar patterns that no longer serve and the mysterious pull toward experiences that seem to promise intensity, excitement, and the electric feeling of being fully alive. The universe conspires tonight to offer understanding through story, to illuminate the hidden wisdom within what appears to be self-destructive attraction, and to reveal the profound healing that awaits when we recognize the sacred longing beneath our most confusing choices. This is a tale of deep recognition, of ancestral patterns, of the soul's fierce desire for authentic experience, and ultimately, of finding peace within the storm of human complexity. Through the lens of narrative, we will explore the psychological landscape of a being who finds themselves magnetically drawn to turbulence, not from a place of pathology, but from a place of deep, often unconscious wisdom seeking expression. Tonight's story unfolds in layers, like the petals of a night-blooming flower, each revelation more beautiful than the last dot. The quantum field shimmers with potential as we prepare to meet our character, a soul whose attraction to chaos holds keys to understanding the profound intelligence of the human psyche. In this space between worlds, where healing happens through the power of witnessed experience, transformation becomes not just possible, but inevitable. As awareness settles into this receptive state, the story begins to weave itself into consciousness, carrying frequencies of understanding that will continue to work long after the words have faded into the peaceful silence of restorative sleep. The narrative that emerges speaks to the universal human experience of seeking intensity as a pathway to feeling fully alive, fully present, fully engaged with the magnificent complexity of existence. Tonight, through the gentle power of story, we journey together into the heart of apparent contradiction, discovering that what seems like destruction often carries the seeds of profound creation, and that the attraction to chaos may be the soul's way of seeking the raw materials for authentic transformation. In this sacred space of narrative healing, understanding dawns like sunrise over mountains, gentle and inevitable in the heart of a bustling metropolis, where glass towers pierce the sky and millions of souls navigate the intricate maze of modern existence, lived a woman named Arya. She was 34, with eyes that held the depth of ocean storms and a smile that could illuminate the darkest corners of human experience. By day, she worked as a crisis counselor at a downtown emergency center, drawn to the intensity of human drama. Like a moth to flame, Arya possessed an unusual gift. She could find her center in the eye of any storm. When others fled from conflict, she moved toward it with the grace of a dancer approaching her partner. When colleagues dreaded the chaos of emergency calls, she felt her nervous system come alive, her senses sharpen, her intuition expand into crystalline clarity. She was, by all accounts, extraordinary at her work, but her personal life told a different story. Her romantic relationships followed a pattern as predictable as the changing seasons. She would meet someone stable, kind, and emotionally available. Someone who offered her the very peace that others sought desperately. Yet within months, sometimes weeks, she would find herself feeling suffocated by their consistency, restless in their reliability, hungry for something her conscious mind couldn't name. The relationships would end, usually initiated by her, leaving behind a trail of bewildered partners and her own growing confusion about what she truly wanted. Arya's apartment reflected her inner landscape. Beautifully organized chaos. Vintage. Books stacked in precarious towers. Art supplies scattered across surfaces like fallen stars. Plants thriving in every corner, despite her erratic care. Friends often commented on the creative energy that pulsed through her space, but they didn't see her late-night pacing, her restless rearranging, her constant need to change something, anything, to feel alive. She had grown up in a household where emotional volatility was the norm. Her mother, a brilliant artist struggling with bipolar disorder, had painted masterpieces during her manic episodes and disappeared into bed for weeks during her depressions. Her father, a gentle academic, had tried to provide stability, but often seemed overwhelmed by the intensity of his wife's emotional weather. Arya had learned early that calm meant someone was about to disappear, and crisis meant everyone was vibrantly present. The psychological landscape of her childhood had wired her nervous system to associate intensity with love, unpredictability with attention, and chaos with the feeling of being fully alive. She had become fluent in the language of emergency, comfortable navigating storms that would devastate others, but restless in the quiet spaces that most people called peace. Her attraction to chaos wasn't random. It was intelligent, purposeful, and deeply rooted in her earliest experiences of what it meant to feel connected to life itself. She saw partners who were struggling with addictions, creative blocks, or emotional instability. She gravitated toward jobs that placed her in the center of human crisis. She chose friends who were going through divorces, career changes, or spiritual emergencies. She was always available for the 3 a.m. phone call, the emergency that required her unique ability to remain calm while others fell apart. Yet, beneath this pattern lay a profound longing that she couldn't articulate. She yearned for something that felt both exciting and safe, both predictable and alive. She wanted to feel the electricity of being fully present without the aftermath of destruction. She craved the intensity of deep connection without the exhaustion of constant crisis management. The city where Arya lived pulsed with its own rhythm of order and chaos, mirroring the internal landscape of countless souls who had been drawn to its magnetic complexity. Streets formed geometric patterns from above, yet at ground level, they revealed themselves as organic rivers of human experience, flowing with the unpredictable currents of life, love, ambition, and dreams. Her neighborhood existed in the space. Between worlds, gentrification hadn't yet claimed its full character, leaving a beautiful tension between the old and new. Victorian houses with peeling paint stood proudly beside sleek condominiums, their architectural conversation reflecting the broader dance between stability and change that characterized her inner world. The area attracted artists, healers, rebels, and seekers, people who, like Arya, were drawn to the edge spaces where transformation lived. The emergency center where she worked occupied a converted warehouse in the arts district, its high ceilings and exposed brick creating a surprisingly nurturing environment for crisis intervention. The building itself told a story of transformation, once a space for manufacturing, now a sanctuary for healing. Windows stretched from floor to ceiling, allowing natural light to flood the space, while the industrial elements remained, honoring the structure's history of creating something useful from raw materials. Arya's office was a small oasis within this larger space. She had painted one wall deep midnight blue and covered it with artwork created by clients over the years. Abstract expressions of pain transformed into beauty, collages of hope assembled from fragments of despair, poetry written in the aftermath of breakthrough moments. A small fountain in the corner provided the gentle sound of moving water, while plants cascaded from shelves, creating a living mandala of green energy. The psychological atmosphere of her workspace reflected her unique gift for finding beauty in breakdown. She had learned to create islands of calm within storms, to offer stability that didn't require the sacrifice of intensity. Her office became a transitional space where people could experience the possibility of feeling both safe and alive, both contained and free. The city's energy patterns supported her work in ways that a quieter environment might not. The constant background hum of millions of lives intersecting created a field of possibility where individual transformation felt both necessary and possible. Emergency sirens, street musicians, construction sounds, and the murmur of diverse languages created a symphony of human experience that validated the full spectrum of emotional expression in this urban landscape. Arya's attraction to chaos found both fuel and understanding. The city itself was a living example of how apparent disorder could create unexpected beauty, how the collision of different energies could generate new possibilities, how the breakdown of old structures could make space for innovations that served the evolving needs of consciousness. The energetic atmosphere of her environment held both the stimulation she craved and the underlying order that her nervous system required. Like a skilled surfer who learns to ride the waves rather than fight them, she had found ways to dance with the city's chaotic rhythms while maintaining her own center. Yet she sensed that something was calling her toward a different kind of relationship with intensity, one that didn't require constant crisis to feel alive. Arya's mornings began with a ritual that revealed the intricate architecture of her psychological patterns. She would wake naturally, without an alarm, her internal clock calibrated to the city's rhythms. The first moments of consciousness brought a familiar scan of her environment, checking her phone for any overnight emergencies, listening to the sounds from neighboring apartments, feeling into the energy of the day ahead. Her morning routine appeared chaotic to outside observers but followed its own intelligent logic. She would move through her apartment like a dancer, drawn to whatever demanded her attention most urgently. Perhaps a plant needed water, or a book called to be relocated, or a sudden inspiration required immediate expression in her journal. She had learned to trust these impulses, recognizing them as her nervous system's way of creating the optimal environment for her unique functioning. The walk to work provided daily opportunities for her pattern to express itself. She would choose routes that maximized the potential for interesting encounters. The pathway that passed the community garden where she might encounter neighbors in crisis. The street where the homeless veteran often needed someone to listen. The cafe where the barista struggled with anxiety and who learned to count on Arya's grounding presence. These weren't conscious choices in the traditional sense. Rather, they emerged from a deep attunement to the energy fields around her, a sensitivity to where her particular gifts might be most needed. She moved through the city like a bee drawn to flowers, guided by invisible currents of human experience that others couldn't perceive. At the emergency center, her pattern became most visible. While colleagues dreaded the phone calls that meant someone was in crisis, Arya's energy would shift into a state of heightened alertness that resembled a meditation master preparing for deep practice. Her breathing would deepen, her awareness would expand, and she would enter a state of profound presence that allowed her to navigate the most chaotic situations with remarkable grace. She had developed an uncanny ability to remain calm while others lost their emotional equilibrium. In the midst of someone's breakdown, she would become more grounded, more centered, more authentically herself. Her voice would drop into deeper registers. Her body would relax into confident stillness, and her mind would access a clarity that surprised even her colleagues who had worked with her for years. The pattern extended into her lunch breaks, when she would seek out the most stimulating environment available. Rather than finding quiet spaces to recharge, she would walk through busy intersections, visit the hospital cafeteria where human drama played out in real time, or sit in the park where she could observe the full spectrum of human experience. Unfolding around her, her evening routine revealed another layer of the pattern. She would return home energized by her day's encounters with intensity, but as the stimulation decreased, she would find herself creating artificial chaos to maintain her optimal arousal level. She might rearrange furniture, start multiple creative projects simultaneously, or reach out to friends who were going through difficult times. The pattern's intelligence became apparent in how it served a nervous system's needs. She had learned to regulate her energy through engagement with external intensity rather than through internal practices. Where others might meditate or exercise to manage stress, she would seek out situations that required her to access her deepest resources of calm and wisdom. Yet the pattern also revealed its limitations. The constant need for external stimulation meant that she rarely experienced the kind of deep rest that comes from sustained periods of low stimulation. She had become skilled at managing crisis, but less practiced at creating and maintaining the conditions for her own thriving. Her attraction to chaos had become both her greatest strength and her most significant challenge. The roots of Arya's pattern stretched back to her earliest memories, woven into the fabric of her being through countless moments of learning what it meant to be safe in an unpredictable world. She had been born into a family system where emotional intensity was the primary language of connection, where the absence of drama often meant the absence of attention, and where her developing nervous system had learned to associate turbulence with love. Her mother, Elena, had been a force of nature, brilliant, creative, and subject to emotional weather patterns that could shift from gentle rain to hurricane conditions within hours. During her manic episodes, Elena would paint with fierce intensity, transforming their living room into an art studio where creativity flowed like water. These were the times when Arya felt most connected to her mother, when Elena's attention was fully present and her love felt abundant and unconditional. The young Arya had learned to recognize the subtle shifts in her mother's energy, becoming exquisitely attuned to the early warning signs of emotional storms. She developed an almost supernatural ability to sense when her mother needed grounding, when her father was reaching his limits, when the family system was about to shift into crisis mode. In these moments, she would instinctively move toward the center of the storm, offering her small but surprisingly steady presence as an anchor. Her father, David, had provided a different kind of teaching. A philosophy professor who preferred the orderly world of ideas to the chaotic realm of emotions. He had responded to Elena's intensity by withdrawing into his study, burying himself in books and academic work. During family crises, he would become increasingly absent, leaving young Arya to navigate the emotional landscape alone. The child learned that when everything was calm and quiet, the adults in her life became unavailable. Her mother would disappear into depression, sleeping for days while Arya taught herself to make sandwiches and tie her shoes. Her father would retreat into intellectual pursuits, present in body but unreachable in spirit. But when crisis struck, both parents would snap into heightened presence, their attention focused and their love tangible. This early conditioning had created a deep, unconscious association between intensity and connection, between chaos and being seen, between emergency and love. Arya's nervous system had learned to interpret calm as abandonment and turbulence as engagement. She had developed what could only be called a genius for finding her center in the eye of any storm, but had never learned to rest in the quiet spaces that others called peace. The pattern had protected her in profound ways. In a household where emotional volatility was unpredictable, her ability to remain calm during crisis had made her invaluable. She had become the family's emotional anchor, the one who could think clearly when others were overwhelmed, the one who could provide stability in the midst of chaos. This role had given her purpose, identity, and a sense of being needed that felt like love. As she grew older, The pattern had evolved and adapted. She had learned to seek out friends who needed rescuing, teachers who were struggling with their own issues, and later, romantic partners who were going through difficult transitions. She had unconsciously recreated the family dynamics that felt most familiar, where her gifts were most needed, where her nervous system felt most alive. The wisdom of the pattern was undeniable. She had developed extraordinary capacities for presence, empathy, and emotional regulation under pressure. She could remain calm in situations that would destabilize others, think clearly in the midst of confusion, and offer exactly the kind of support that people in crisis needed most. Her childhood experiences had forged her into a skilled healer, though she had paid a price in her ability to rest in simplicity. Yet the pattern also carried the seeds of its own transformation. The very skills that had emerged from her attraction to chaos, her ability to find center in the storm, to remain present during intensity, to offer stability without requiring others to change, contained the blueprint for learning to feel equally alive in states of peace. The collision between Arya's established pattern and her evolving consciousness began on a Tuesday morning in late spring, when she encountered something that would fundamentally challenge her understanding of what it meant to feel fully alive. She had arrived at the emergency center to find an unusual scene. The building was quiet, the phones were silent, and her colleagues were engaging in what appeared to be relaxed conversation. Her nervous system, calibrated for crisis, began to send signals of unease. Without the familiar background hum of emergency, she felt strangely disconnected from herself, as if her identity was somehow tied to the presence of chaos around her. She found herself checking her phone repeatedly, looking for missed calls or urgent messages that would restore her sense of purpose and aliveness. The morning stretched ahead with unusual calm, and Arya began to notice something she had never observed before: the way her colleagues seemed to relax into the quiet moments, how they used the lull to tend to their own needs, how they appeared to find genuine satisfaction in the absence of crisis. She watched them with the fascination of an anthropologist studying a foreign culture, trying to understand how anyone could feel content without the electricity of emergency dawn. As the hours passed without incident, Arya found herself creating small dramas to maintain her optimal arousal level. She reorganized her office with unnecessary urgency, made follow-up calls to clients who didn't need immediate attention, and found herself manufacturing reasons to feel concerned about situations that were actually progressing well. The pattern was running automatically, seeking stimulation like a plant seeking sunlight. But something new was happening in her awareness. For the first time, she was observing her own behavior with curiosity rather than judgment. She began to notice the exhaustion that lived beneath her attraction to intensity, the way her body held tension even in moments of apparent calm, the subtle anxiety that arose when she wasn't needed to manage someone else's crisis. The recognition came gradually. Like dawn breaking over a landscape she thought she knew completely. She realized that her attraction to chaos wasn't just about feeling alive. It was about avoiding the deeper vulnerability of being present with herself when nothing was demanding her attention. In the quiet moments, she encountered parts of herself that she had learned to bypass through constant engagement with external intensity. That afternoon, when a genuine emergency finally arose, Arya responded with her usual grace and competence. But as she guided a young man through a panic attack, she noticed something different in her own experience. Alongside her familiar sense of aliveness and purpose, she felt a subtle sadness, a recognition that while she was skilled at holding space for others' transformation, she had never learned to extend the same quality of presence to her own process. The collision had begun between the pattern that had served her survival and the emerging possibility of thriving, between the familiar intensity that felt like home and the unknown territory of finding aliveness in states of peace. She sensed that she was standing at the threshold of a fundamental shift. Though she couldn't yet imagine what lay on the other side, her resistance to this recognition was immediate and fierce. The pattern had been her identity, her strength, her way of feeling valuable in the world. The thought of changing it felt like losing herself, like abandoning the very qualities that made her effective at her work and needed by others. Yet beneath the resistance, she felt something else, a deep curiosity about what it might feel like to be fully alive without requiring crisis to activate her aliveness. The collision continued as she walked home through the city streets, past the familiar landmarks that had once felt like opportunities for meaningful engagement. For the first time, she noticed how exhausting it was to maintain constant vigilance for others' needs, how draining it was to be perpetually available for emergency, how lonely it felt to be always giving but rarely receiving the kind of presence she offered so freely to others that the universe, in its infinite wisdom, arranged for Arya to encounter her catalyst in the most unexpected way. It was during her lunch break on a particularly quiet day when she found herself wandering through the botanical gardens that bordered the city's arts district. She had never visited this space before, always too busy with more stimulating activities to consider the appeal of simply walking among plants. But something had drawn her there. Perhaps the unusual stillness of the day, perhaps her growing curiosity about what else might be possible beyond the familiar patterns of her existence. She found herself on a winding path that led through different ecosystems, each section designed to demonstrate how various plants thrived under specific conditions. As she rounded a corner, she encountered an elderly woman sitting on a bench, surrounded by what appeared to be complete chaos. The woman had numerous bags scattered around her, papers fluttering in the breeze, and she was speaking animatedly to herself while gesturing at the plants. Arya's familiar pattern activated immediately. Here was someone who clearly needed assistance, someone in apparent distress who could benefit from her crisis management skills. She approached the woman with her usual calm confidence, prepared to offer whatever support might be needed. But as she drew closer, she realized that what she had interpreted as chaos was actually a complex system of organization that she simply hadn't understood at first glance. The woman was a botanist, conducting research on how different plants responded to various stress conditions, and her apparent disorganization was actually a sophisticated methodology for tracking multiple variables simultaneously. "Oh, hello there," the woman said, looking up with eyes that sparkled with intelligence and warmth. "I'm Dr. Margaret Chun. I couldn't help but notice how you approached me. You have the bearing of someone who's used to helping others through difficult times." Arya introduced herself, still feeling slightly off balance at having misread the situation so completely. Dr. Chun gestured to the space beside her on the bench, and something in her manner suggested that this was an invitation worth accepting. "I've been studying plants for over 40 years, Dr. Chung continued, and I've learned something fascinating about how they respond to stress. Most people assume that plants prefer calm, stable conditions, but the reality is far more complex. Some plants actually require periodic stress to reach their full potential. They need the challenge of wind to develop strong root systems. They need the stress of drought to produce their most potent healing compounds. They need the intensity of seasonal change to trigger their most beautiful flowering." As she spoke, she pointed to various plants around them, explaining how each had adapted to thrive not despite challenging conditions, but because of them. Arya found herself listening with an intensity that surprised her, as if Dr. Chun was speaking directly to something deep within her consciousness. "But here's what's truly remarkable," Dr. Chung continued. "The plants that have learned to thrive under stress also develop an extraordinary capacity for peace. They can remain calm during storms because they've learned to use the intensity as energy for growth rather than fighting against it. They've discovered the secret of metabolizing chaos into wisdom. The words landed in Arya's awareness like seeds finding fertile soil. She began to understand that her attraction to chaos wasn't pathological. It was an adaptation, a way of accessing energy and purpose that had served her survival. But like the plants Dr. Jung described, she had the potential to evolve beyond merely surviving stress to actually transforming it into something beautiful. I suspect, Dr. Jung said gently, that you might be someone who has learned to thrive in challenging conditions, but perhaps hasn't yet discovered how to rest in the spaces between storms. Am I right? The question opened something in Arya's chest, a recognition so profound that tears began to form in her eyes. For the first time, someone had seen her pattern not as a problem to be fixed, but as a sophisticated adaptation that could be honored and evolved. Dr. Jung reached into one of her bags and pulled out a small succulent plant, its leaves thick with stored water and its structure compact and resilient. This little one has learned to store calm within chaos, she said, placing it in Arya's hands. It draws energy from intense sunlight and dramatic temperature changes, but it also knows how to conserve resources during quiet periods. It's learned that both states, intensity and peace, are necessary for complete thriving. As Arya held the plant, she felt something shift in her understanding of her own possibilities. Perhaps her attraction to chaos wasn't something to overcome, but something to integrate. Perhaps she could learn to access the same aliveness in states of peace that she had always found in states of intensity. There's a meditation garden just through that archway. Dr. Jung pointed to a passage between two large trees. It's designed specifically for people who have learned to find their center in storms, but want to discover what it feels like to be equally alive in stillness. You might find it interesting. Arya's first steps into the meditation garden felt like entering an alien landscape. The space was circular, with winding paths that spiraled inward toward a central fountain where water fell in gentle cascades over smooth stones. The design was simultaneously simple and complex, orderly enough to feel safe, but with sufficient variation to prevent boredom. She chose a bench that faced the fountain and attempted to simply sit, something she realized she had rarely done without a specific purpose or crisis to contemplate. Within moments, her nervous system began to protest. Her mind started generating lists of things she should be doing, people she should be checking on, problems that might need her attention. The familiar restlessness arose, the feeling that she was wasting time, that she was somehow failing by not being urgently needed somewhere. But something about Dr. Jung's words, about the plant now resting in her lap, encouraged her to stay present with the discomfort rather than immediately seeking stimulation. She began to notice the subtle ways her body held tension, the way her breathing remained shallow even in this peaceful environment, the way her eyes kept scanning for potential problems to solve. Gradually, she began to experiment with consciously relaxing her vigilance. She allowed her breathing to deepen, her shoulders to drop, her awareness to rest in the present moment without seeking something to fix or improve. The experience was surprisingly challenging. Like learning to speak a foreign language, she had to consciously practice a way of being that didn't come naturally. As days passed, she found herself returning to the garden during lunch breaks, conducting small experiments in presence. She would sit for increasingly longer periods, practicing the art of being fully awake without being activated by emergency. She began to notice subtleties in the environment that she had never perceived before. The way light moved through leaves, the complex harmonies created by different birds, the intricate patterns of water flowing over stone. Her nervous system began to adapt to these new conditions. The initial anxiety of not being needed gave way to a different kind of aliveness, a sense of being present with life itself rather than with life's problems. She discovered that she could feel the same intensity of engagement with beauty that she had always felt with crisis, the same depth of presence with peace that she had always accessed during emergency. The experiments extended beyond the garden. She began to practice bringing the same quality of attention she gave to people in crisis to people in calm moments. She discovered that her colleagues appreciated her presence even when they weren't in distress, that her friends valued her company even when they weren't struggling with problems, that her own experience could be interesting and worthy of attention, even when it wasn't dramatic. At work, she began to notice opportunities for what she started calling preventive presence, ways of connecting with colleagues and clients before crisis arose, ways of offering support that actually reduced the likelihood of emergency rather than simply managing it effectively once it occurred. She found herself becoming interested in the conditions that supported thriving rather than just the skills needed for surviving. Her attraction to chaos began to evolve into something more sophisticated. Rather than seeking out drama for its own sake, she began to discern between healthy intensity and destructive turbulence. She learned to recognize when her nervous system was craving stimulation and to experiment with meeting that need in ways that were nourishing rather than depleting. The small succulent plant became her teacher in this process. She watched how it responded to different conditions, how it could be fully present with whatever was happening without losing its essential stability. She began to understand that true resilience wasn't about enduring stress, but about learning to metabolize all experiences, both intense and peaceful, into energy for growth. Her experiments in the garden started to shift her dreams. Instead of the familiar themes of rescue and emergency, she began to dream of herself as a tree with deep roots, able to dance with wind without being uprooted, able to rest in stillness without losing vitality. The dreams felt like previews of a way of being that was emerging from within her established patterns. The breakthrough came on a morning when Arya arrived at the emergency center to find herself facing a situation that would have previously activated every aspect of her crisis management skills. Multiple phone lines were ringing simultaneously. Colleagues were rushing between offices, and the energy in the building felt charged with urgency and stress. But instead of immediately diving into the chaos, she found herself pausing. The weeks of practice in the meditation garden had created a small space of choice where there had once been only automatic response. She took a deep breath, felt her feet on the ground, and consciously chose her next action rather than simply reacting from familiar patterns. As she approached the central desk to assess the situation, she noticed something remarkable happening in her nervous system. Instead of the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with crisis, she felt a different kind of energy, calm, grounded, and extraordinarily present. She was experiencing the same level of aliveness she had always associated with chaos, but her inner state remained peaceful and centered. She moved through the morning with unprecedented grace, responding to each emergency with her usual competence, but from a fundamentally different internal state. She found herself able to offer even more effective support to people in crisis, because she wasn't unconsciously feeding off their energy to maintain her own sense of aliveness. She was present with their experience without needing their crisis to feel alive herself. The breakthrough deepened when she encountered Maria, a young woman who had been struggling with panic attacks and had called the crisis line 3 times in the past week. Previous conversations had followed the familiar pattern. Maria would be in acute distress. Arya would provide excellent crisis intervention, and Maria would feel better temporarily before the cycle repeated. But this time, something different happened. As Arya listened to Maria's familiar story of anxiety and overwhelm, she found herself hearing something new beneath. The crisis was a deeper longing for someone to see her wholeness rather than just her problems. Maria wasn't just seeking help with her panic attacks. She was seeking recognition of her inherent completeness, her capacity for peace, her potential for thriving. Arya found herself responding from a place she had never accessed before. Instead of immediately moving into crisis management mode, she began to reflect back to Maria not just her distress, but her strength, her resilience, her capacity for growth. She helped Maria recognize that her panic attacks might be her nervous system's way of seeking the same thing Arya had been seeking: aliveness, presence, and full engagement with life. "What if," Arya heard herself saying, "your anxiety is actually your system's way of trying to help you feel more alive? What if instead of seeing it as a problem to solve, we can understand it as energy that wants to be channeled in a different direction?" The conversation that followed was unlike any crisis intervention Arya had ever experienced. Instead of focusing solely on symptom management, she and Maria began to explore the deeper intelligence within Maria's experience. They discovered that Maria's panic attacks often occurred when she was trying to avoid feeling the intensity of her own aliveness. When she was attempting to maintain a level of calm that was actually understimulating for her particular nervous system. By the end of their conversation, Maria had experienced something she had never felt before: a sense of being seen and supported in her wholeness rather than just her brokenness. She left with tools not just for managing anxiety, but for channeling her intense energy into creative expression and meaningful connection. The breakthrough continued throughout the day as Arya found herself operating from this new paradigm in all her interactions. She was discovering that her attraction to chaos had been a brilliant adaptation, but it could evolve into something even more sophisticated: an ability to bring the same quality of presence and aliveness to any experience, whether intense or peaceful. As she drove home that evening, Arya realized that something fundamental had shifted in her understanding of herself and her possibilities. She no longer needed to choose between being alive and being at peace. She had discovered that true aliveness included the capacity for both intensity and stillness, both engagement and rest, both passion and serenity. The pattern that had once seemed like a limitation was revealing itself as a doorway to a more complete way of being. Her attraction to chaos had been her soul's way of seeking full engagement with life, but now she was learning to find that same engagement in states of peace, beauty, and simple presence. The weeks following Arya's breakthrough unfolded like a masterclass in conscious evolution. She found herself living in a reality where her old patterns and new awareness coexisted, creating a richer, more complex experience of what it meant to be fully alive. Her days began to follow a different rhythm, one that honored both her need for meaningful engagement and her growing capacity for peace. Her morning routine evolved into something that would have been unimaginable just months before. She still woke naturally, but instead of immediately scanning for crisis, she would spend a few minutes simply breathing and feeling into her body's wisdom. The succulent plant from Dr. Chun had found a home on her bedside table, and she would often begin her day by observing its quiet vitality, remembering that aliveness could be as present in stillness as in storm. The walk to work became a meditation in conscious choice. Rather than automatically seeking the most stimulating route, she would check in with her nervous system and choose the path that would best support her overall well-being. Some days, this meant taking the familiar route through the community garden where she might encounter neighbors who needed support. Other days, it meant choosing the quieter path through the park where she could practice presence with beauty rather than crisis. At the emergency center, her colleagues began to notice something different about her energy. She remained as competent and available as ever during genuine crises, but she was no longer unconsciously creating urgency where none existed. Her presence had become more calming, more grounding, and paradoxically, more effective at preventing situations from escalating into crisis. she began to experiment with what she called proactive presence, reaching out to clients during calm periods, offering support before problems became emergencies, helping people build resilience rather than simply managing breakdown. This approach felt deeply satisfying in ways that crisis intervention alone had never achieved. She was discovering that preventing suffering could be as engaging as alleviating it. Her relationships outside of work began to shift as well. She found herself drawn to connections that offered both depth and stability, where intensity arose naturally from genuine intimacy rather than manufactured drama. She began to notice how exhausting it had been to maintain relationships that required constant crisis to feel alive, and how nourishing it could be to share experiences of beauty, creativity, and simple presence with others. The change was perhaps most noticeable in her home environment. The beautiful chaos of her apartment began to reorganize itself around a different principle. Instead of random stimulation, she created spaces that supported both creative intensity and peaceful rest. She designated areas for different activities, allowing herself to move between states of engagement and relaxation with conscious intention rather than unconscious reactivity. Her creative expression exploded into new forms. She began to write, not about crisis and emergency, but about the subtle beauty of transformation, the quiet moments of breakthrough, the gentle process of healing. She started a blog called Finding Fire in Stillness, where she explored the intersection of intensity and peace, drawing readers who were also learning to find aliveness beyond crisis. Her dating life underwent a complete metamorphosis. Instead of seeking partners who needed rescuing, she found herself attracted to people who were already whole, who could meet her intensity with their own groundedness, who offered the possibility of growing together rather than healing each other. She began a relationship with James, a musician who had learned to channel his own attraction to chaos into creative expression rather than destructive relationships. Their connection offered something she had never experienced before: the electricity of two complete people choosing to share their aliveness rather than two wounded people trying to fix each other. They would spend evenings creating music together, his guitar weaving melodies around her spoken word poetry, their creative process demonstrating how intensity and harmony could coexist. The new reality wasn't without its challenges. Her nervous system occasionally rebelled against the decreased stimulation, craving the familiar rush of emergency. During these moments, she learned to channel the energy into intense physical exercise, passionate creative projects, or deep conversations about meaningful topics. She discovered countless ways to feel fully alive that didn't require crisis or chaos. Her work began to evolve beyond crisis intervention toward what she started calling thriving facilitation. She developed workshops for people who, like her, had learned to associate aliveness with intensity but wanted to expand their capacity for peace. Her unique background allowed her to speak with authority about both the gifts and limitations of chaos attraction, offering participants a path toward integration rather than elimination of their patterns. The success of these workshops led to speaking engagements and consultation opportunities. She found herself helping organizations understand how to support employees who thrived under pressure while also creating sustainable work environments. Her message was revolutionary in its simplicity. The goal wasn't to eliminate intensity, but to learn to choose it consciously rather than compulsively. As autumn arrived, Arya noticed that the seasonal transition mirrored her own internal transformation. Just as the trees were learning to let go of what no longer served while maintaining their essential vitality, she was discovering how to release outdated patterns while honoring the wisdom they contained. Her internal dialogue had undergone complete renovation. Where once a critical voice had demanded constant productivity and crisis management, now a gentler, wiser voice encouraged both engagement and rest. She learned to speak to herself with the same compassion she had always offered to others, recognizing that self-kindness was not self-indulgence, but rather the foundation for sustainable service. The practice of emotional regulation that had once been reserved for crisis situations began to permeate her daily experience. She found herself able to remain present with the full spectrum of human emotion, both her own and others, without being overwhelmed or activated. Joy became as welcome as sorrow, anger as acceptable as peace, fear as valid as courage. She developed what she called conscious intensity protocols, ways of deliberately engaging with challenging experiences that felt nourishing rather than depleting. This might involve taking on a complex case at work, engaging in difficult but necessary conversations with family members, or pushing herself physically through challenging hikes in the mountains surrounding the city. The key difference was intention. Rather than unconsciously seeking chaos to feel alive, she was consciously choosing intensity as a tool for growth, creativity, and service. She learned to distinguish between the clean energy of chosen challenge and the muddy energy of manufactured drama. Her body wisdom expanded exponentially. She became fluent in the subtle signals that indicated when she needed stimulation versus when she needed rest, when intensity would serve her growth versus when it would deplete her resources. Her nervous system became a trusted ally rather than an unconscious driver of her choices. The boundaries she established were unlike anything she had previously understood. Rather than rigid walls that kept intensity out, she developed permeable membranes that allowed her to engage fully with life's challenges while maintaining her essential center. She could be present with others' crises without taking them on as her own, offer support without becoming responsible for outcomes she couldn't control. Her relationship with time transformed completely. Instead of living in a constant state of urgency, she learned to recognize the difference between genuine emergency and manufactured crisis. She began to trust that most problems didn't require immediate solution. That people were generally more resilient than her old pattern had assumed, and that her value wasn't dependent on being constantly needed. The wisdom she embodied began to influence everyone around her. Colleagues started seeking her guidance not just during crises, but for perspective on how to live with greater balance and authenticity. Friends appreciated her presence during both challenging and peaceful times. Family members began to experience her as someone who could hold space for their full humanity rather than just their problems. She started a monthly gathering called Intensity Integration Circle, where people who shared similar patterns could explore together how to metabolize their attraction to chaos into wisdom. The group became a laboratory for discovering how high-sensation individuals could thrive in a world that often demanded either complete calm or destructive intensity. Transformation radiating outward from Arya's inner work began to create waves of change that extended far beyond her immediate circle. Her new way of being seemed to give others permission to examine their own relationships with intensity, peace, and what it truly meant to feel alive. At the emergency center, her colleagues began to adopt some of her approaches to proactive care. The entire culture of the organization started to shift from reactive crisis management toward preventive wellness support. Statistics showed a measurable decrease in repeat crisis calls as clients learned to build resilience rather than simply survive emergency situations. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the center's director, approached Arya about developing a training program for other crisis counselors. "What you've discovered," she told Arya, "isn't just personal transformation. It's a new paradigm for how we support people who are drawn to intensity. You're showing us that we can honor these patterns while helping people evolve beyond compulsive chaos seeking." The training program Arya developed became a model that other emergency centers began to adopt. She found herself traveling to conferences, sharing her insights about the intelligence within chaos attraction and a possibility of transforming survival patterns into thriving strategies. Her message resonated particularly strongly with helping professionals who had their own history of being drawn to crisis situations. James, her musician partner, began incorporating themes from their conversations into his songwriting. His band's new album, Storm Dancing, explored the territory between intensity and peace that their relationship had taught him to navigate. The music reached people who were also learning to find aliveness beyond crisis, creating a community of individuals who supported each other's evolution. Her family relationships underwent profound healing. Her mother, Elena, began to understand that her daughter's early role as emotional anchor hadn't been necessary for love to exist between them. They developed a new kind of connection based on mutual creativity and shared growth rather than crisis management. Elena's own artistic expression stabilized as she learned to access inspiration without requiring emotional chaos. Her father, David, emerged from his academic isolation to engage more fully with both his wife and daughter. He began to understand that emotional intensity wasn't something to flee from, but something that could be met with presence and wisdom. The family dynamic shifted from crisis-driven to growth-oriented, with each member supporting the other's authentic expression. The blog, Finding Fire in Stillness, attracted readers from around the world who resonated with Arya's journey. The comment sections became spaces for people to share their own experiences of learning to find aliveness beyond chaos. An online community formed, offering support and resources for individuals who were transforming their relationships with intensity. Maria, the young woman who had struggled with panic attacks, became one of Arya's success stories and eventually a peer counselor herself. She learned to channel her intense nervous system energy into advocacy work for mental health awareness, discovering that her sensitivity was actually a superpower when consciously directed. The ripple effects extended into unexpected areas. Urban planners began consulting with Arya about how to design city spaces that could accommodate both the need for stimulation and the need for peace. She helped develop pocket parks with varying levels of sensory input, allowing high-sensation individuals to find appropriate environments for different states of being. A local university invited her to collaborate on research about the positive aspects of sensation-seeking behavior. Her experiential knowledge, combined with academic research, began to challenge long-held assumptions about the pathology of chaos attraction, leading to more nuanced understanding of how intensity-seeking could be channeled constructively. The meditation garden where her transformation had begun became a pilgrimage site of sorts for people following similar journeys. Dr. Jung, now in her 70s, continued her plant research while informally mentoring visitors who were learning to metabolize chaos into wisdom. The garden expanded to include different zones designed for various nervous system types and healing approaches. As winter settled over the city like a gentle blanket, Arya found herself ready to explore the deepest territory of her transformation journey, the integration of the shadow aspects of her chaos attraction that she had previously been unwilling to acknowledge. This exploration required a level of honesty and self-compassion that had taken months of preparation to develop. She began to recognize that her pattern of seeking intensity hadn't been purely altruistic or adaptive. There had been elements of control hidden within her rescue behaviors, ways that maintaining others' dependence on her crisis management skills had served her ego and sense of superiority. She had sometimes unconsciously encouraged drama to maintain her role as the stable center, the one whose calm presence was essential for others' well-being. The recognition came without the self-judgment that would have previously accompanied such insights. Instead, she found herself approaching these shadow aspects with the same compassionate curiosity she brought to her clients' struggles. She understood that these controlling tendencies had emerged from her childhood need to feel valuable and secure in an unpredictable environment. She also acknowledged the ways her attraction to chaos had sometimes been destructive rather than constructive. There had been relationships she had unconsciously destabilized when they became too peaceful, projects she had sabotaged when they were progressing too smoothly, opportunities she had avoided because they didn't offer enough drama to feel engaging. The shadow work revealed another layer of wisdom. Her attraction to intensity had also been a way of avoiding the vulnerability of her own tender emotions. It was easier to focus on others' crises than to feel her own grief about her childhood losses, her own fear of abandonment, her own longing for the kind of consistent love she had never experienced. In therapy sessions with Dr. Patricia Williams, a Jungian analyst who specialized in shadow integration, Arya learned to hold space for all aspects of her personality. The controlling, manipulative, drama-seeking parts of herself weren't enemies to be vanquished, but exiled aspects, seeking recognition and integration. She discovered that her attraction to chaos had also been her psyche's way of seeking what Carl Jung called the transcendent function, the capacity to hold paradox, to bridge opposites, to find meaning in apparent contradiction. Her nervous system had been unconsciously seeking experiences that would expand her capacity to encompass the full spectrum of human experience. The shadow integration process involved learning to express these previously hidden aspects in conscious, constructive ways. Her need for control could be channeled into leadership roles where her ability to remain calm during crisis served larger purposes. Her tendency toward drama could be expressed through creative projects that explored intense themes without creating real-world chaos. She began to understand that what she had labeled as her attraction to chaos was actually a profound gift for transformation, both her own and others. She had an unusual capacity to remain present during the breakdown phases that preceded breakthrough, to find meaning in apparent meaninglessness, to trust the intelligence within apparent disorder. The integration allowed her to access even greater depths of empathy and effectiveness in her work. She could now recognize the shadow aspects in her clients' patterns without judgment, helping them discover the hidden wisdom within their most challenging behaviors. Her own experience of shadow integration gave her permission to help others embrace their full complexity rather than trying to eliminate their difficult aspects. Her relationship with James deepened as she became more authentic about her shadow aspects. She shared with him the way she had sometimes unconsciously created drama in previous relationships, the controlling tendencies that still arose when she felt insecure, the parts of herself that craved intensity in potentially destructive ways. His acceptance of her full humanity created a safety that allowed even deeper intimacy. Spring's return brought with it a blossoming of what Arya could only describe as soul alignment, a sense that her external life was finally reflecting her deepest values and authentic nature. The months of inner work had created space for a clarity about her life's purpose that had previously been obscured by the urgency of constant crisis management. She realized that her true calling wasn't just crisis intervention, but rather serving as a bridge between the worlds of intensity and peace, helping others discover that they didn't have to choose between feeling alive and feeling at peace. Her unique background and hard-won wisdom positioned her to guide others who were navigating similar territory. The speaking engagements and workshops had evolved into something larger, a movement of people who were transforming their relationships with intensity, chaos, and aliveness. She was invited to write a book about her journey, tentatively titled Dancing with Storms: Finding Aliveness Beyond Crisis. The writing process became a form of meditation, allowing her to distill years of experience into wisdom that others could apply to their own lives. Her romantic relationship with James had matured into something she had never believed possible, a partnership that offered both passionate intensity and peaceful stability. They had learned to create together, to challenge each other's growth, to provide mutual support without losing their individual identities. Their love had become a living demonstration that intensity and peace could coexist beautifully. The work at the emergency center continued to be deeply satisfying, but Arya found herself increasingly drawn to preventive work, helping people build resilience before they reached crisis points, training other helpers in trauma-informed approaches that honored the intelligence within apparent dysfunction, developing community programs that supported thriving rather than just surviving. She began to understand that her attraction to chaos had been her soul's way of seeking what the mystics called divine intensity, the profound aliveness that took from being fully present with life's raw reality. She had mistaken destructive drama for sacred intensity, but now she could distinguish between the two and consciously choose experiences that opened her heart rather than depleted her energy. Her daily life became a practice of conscious living. Morning meditations in the garden, mindful attention to her body's needs, creative expression through writing and collaborative music making with James, meaningful work that utilized her gifts in service of others' healing, evening practices of gratitude and reflection. Each day felt like a masterpiece being painted with intentional brushstrokes. The financial abundance that followed from her authentic expression allowed her to make choices based on alignment rather than necessity. She could afford to work fewer crisis shifts and spend more time on prevention and education. She could travel to conferences and training programs that expanded her knowledge and skills. She could create the beautiful, peaceful home environment that supported her nervous system's need for both stimulation and rest. Her relationship with her family continued to deepen as all three members learned to relate from their healed rather than wounded places. Family gatherings became celebrations of each person's growth and creativity rather than exercises in crisis management. Ellen's art flourished in new directions. David emerged as a gifted teacher of philosophy to non-academic audiences, and Arya found herself able to receive their love as well as give it. The soul alignment manifested in her body as a kind of vitality she had never experienced before. Her energy was sustainable rather than manic. Her strength was grounded rather than brittle. Her aliveness was consistent rather than dependent on external circumstances. She had found the holy grail she had unconsciously been seeking, a way to feel fully alive that was nourishing rather than depleting. As Arya's second year of conscious transformation drew to a close, she found herself experiencing something that could only be described as transcendent connection, a sense of being part of something larger than her individual story, yet more intimate than her personal experience. The meditation garden where her journey had begun became a place of pilgrimage, not just for her, but for the growing community of people who were learning to transform their relationships with intensity. Dr. Chun, now approaching 80, had become an unofficial elder for the movement, her plant wisdom serving as a metaphor for human resilience and adaptation. During one of their regular conversations, Dr. Chun shared an insight that crystallized Arya's understanding of her journey. You know, my dear, what you've discovered isn't just personal healing. It's evolutionary healing. You're helping our species learn to metabolize intensity in ways that serve life rather than destroying it. Your attraction to chaos was actually your soul's way of preparing you for this larger service. The words resonated with the truth that Arya felt in her bones. She began to understand that her individual healing was connected to a much larger process of collective transformation. Around the world, people were awakening to the need for new ways of relating to intensity, conflict, and change. Her journey was part of a larger movement toward conscious evolution. Her work expanded beyond individual therapy and crisis intervention to include systems-level healing. She was invited to consult with organizations about how to create cultures that could channel intensity constructively, how to support employees who thrived under pressure while also maintaining sustainable work environments, how to transform conflict into creativity rather than destruction. The book she was writing became a collaboration with several other authors who had undergone similar transformations. Together, they were documenting the emergence of what they called post-traumatic thriving, the capacity to not just heal from intense experiences, but to transform them into wisdom that served others. Her relationship with the divine, which had been largely absent during her years of compulsive chaos-seeking, re-emerged in a form that surprised her with its simplicity and naturalness. She found the sacred in the ordinary moments of deep presence, in the space between crisis and calm, in the infinite creativity that arose when she aligned with, rather than fought, against the rhythms of life. Prayer became as natural as breathing. Not the desperate bargaining of her crisis years, but a continuous conversation with the intelligence that was orchestrating her growth and the growth of all beings. She felt held by something larger than herself, yet recognized that this larger intelligence was also the deepest truth of her own being. The transcendent connection manifested in her relationships as an extraordinary capacity for presence and love. She could be with others in their full humanity, their light and shadow, their growth and resistance, their clarity and confusion, without needing them to be different than they were. This unconditional presence became her greatest gift and her most effective healing tool. James often said that loving Arya had taught him about divine love, the kind of love that sees and accepts everything while also inspiring the beloved toward their highest potential. Their relationship became a laboratory for exploring how human love could serve as a gateway to universal love. The ripple effects of her transformation now extended to thousands of people through her writing, speaking, and the training programs she had developed. But more importantly, she had learned to trust that her simple presence, her embodiment of the possibility of finding aliveness beyond crisis, was itself a service to the evolution of consciousness. As our tale draws to its natural conclusion, we find Arya 3 years into her journey of conscious transformation, standing in the meditation garden where her awakening first began. The seasons have cycled through their eternal dance, and she has learned to dance with them, finding beauty and purpose in each phase of the endless spiral of growth and rest, intensity and peace, expansion and integration. The woman who once could only feel alive in the midst of crisis now moves through her days with a different kind of aliveness, one that encompasses the full spectrum of human experience without requiring external chaos to activate her vitality. She has discovered that true aliveness includes the capacity for deep rest, genuine peace, and the kind of sustainable joy that emerges from alignment with one's authentic nature. Her work continues to evolve, touching ever-widening circles of influence. The Crisis Center has become a model for trauma-informed care that honors the intelligence within all human responses to stress. Her book has reached people around the world who recognize their own stories in her journey from compulsive chaos-seeking to conscious intensity cultivation. The relationship with James has matured into the kind of partnership she never imagined possible, a union that generates creative energy without requiring dramatic turbulence, that provides both adventure and security, that celebrates both individual growth and mutual support. Their love has become a living example of how intensity and peace can dance together in perfect harmony. Most importantly, Arya has learned to be her own beloved, to offer herself the same quality of presence and compassion that she had always given so freely to others. The internal critic that once demanded constant productivity has been transformed into an internal ally that encourages both meaningful engagement and restorative rest. As she sits beside the fountain where water falls in endless patterns of beauty and grace, Arya reflects on the profound intelligence that had been hidden within her attraction to chaos. That pull toward intensity had been her soul's way of seeking full engagement with life, her psyche's method of developing the capacity to hold paradox, her spirit's preparation for serving as a bridge between worlds that others experienced as incompatible. The succulent plant from Dr. Jung, now flourishing in a place of honor in her home, continues to teach her about the possibility of storing calm within intensity, of drawing nourishment from challenging conditions while maintaining essential stability. She has become like that plant, resilient, beautiful, and capable of thriving in whatever conditions life presents. The garden around her holds the stories of countless other souls who have made similar journeys, each discovering their own path, from compulsive pattern to conscious choice, from survival mode to thriving mode, from seeking aliveness through crisis to finding aliveness in presence itself. Their collective transformation represents a new possibility for human consciousness, the evolution beyond trauma into what can only be called wisdom. As you listen to Arya's story, perhaps you recognize something of your own journey within her transformation. Perhaps you too have found yourself drawn to intensity, seeking aliveness in places that others might consider chaotic or dangerous. Perhaps you too have wondered whether your attraction to complexity and challenge represents a flaw to be corrected or a gift to be understood and channeled consciously. The wisdom that Arya discovered is available to you as well. The understanding that your nervous system's preferences, your energetic needs, your ways of seeking engagement with life contain profound intelligence. Whatever patterns you have developed, they emerged for good reasons, served important functions, and can be honored even as they evolve. Your body holds the memory of Arya's transformation, the possibility of finding the same aliveness in states of peace that you may have previously found only in states of intensity. Your nervous system can learn to metabolize all experiences, both stimulating and calming, into energy for growth and service. The cells of your being are receiving this story's healing frequencies, absorbing the permission to transform survival patterns into thriving strategies, to evolve beyond compulsive seeking into conscious choosing. Your subconscious mind is integrating new possibilities, new ways of understanding what it means to feel fully alive while also feeling deeply at peace. As you prepare for sleep, you carry with you the understanding that transformation is always possible, that wisdom can emerge from the most confusing patterns, that what appears to be chaos often contains the seeds of a more beautiful order. Your dreams tonight will continue the work of integration, weaving together all the parts of yourself into a more complete, more conscious, more compassionate whole. The part of you that has been drawn to intensity is not a problem to solve, but a gift to understand. The part of you that craves stimulation is not an enemy to defeat, but an ally whose needs can be met in increasingly skillful ways. The part of you that has created chaos may have been seeking the raw materials for authentic creation. You have permission to be exactly where you are in your journey, while also remaining open to where you might grow. You have permission to honor your past choices, while making new ones that serve your evolving understanding of what truly nourishes your soul. As consciousness begins its gentle journey toward the restorative realm of sleep, allow your body to surrender into the support that surrounds you. Like Arya learning to rest in the meditation garden, your nervous system can release its vigilance, trusting that this is a safe space for complete relaxation and renewal. Feel your breathing naturally deepening, each exhale carrying away any residual tension, any remaining activation, any lingering need to be anywhere other than exactly where you are in this moment. Your body knows how to rest, how to restore, how to integrate the wisdom that has been received through this story into the very fabric of your being. Your mind can become as peaceful as the fountain in Arya's garden. Thoughts are rising and falling, like gentle water, creating beauty through their movement while always returning to the stillness from which they emerged. There is nothing you need to figure out right now. nothing you need to change or fix or improve. This is a time for pure receiving, pure being, pure rest. Allow the story's healing vibrations to settle into your cells like seeds finding fertile soil. Throughout the night, as your conscious mind rests, the deeper intelligence of your being will continue the work of transformation, weaving together insights and possibilities into new patterns of wholeness and peace. Your dreams may carry forward themes of integration, of finding aliveness in unexpected places, of discovering that what you thought were your greatest challenges may actually be your most profound gifts waiting to be consciously expressed. Trust in the wisdom of your unconscious mind to create exactly the experiences you need for continued growth and healing. Like the succulent plant that stores calm within intensity, you too can learn to maintain your essential peace regardless of external circumstances. Your deepest self knows how to be both fully engaged and completely at rest, both passionate about life and serene in being dot as sleep approaches like a gentle tide, washing over the shores of your awareness. Know that you are held by the same intelligence that guides the seasons, that moves the planets, that beats your heart without your conscious effort. You are part of an infinite web of connection and support, loved beyond measure, and free to rest in the absolute safety of being exactly who you are. Let sleep come now like a blessing, carrying you into the dream time where healing happens beyond the reach of the rational mind, where transformation occurs in the spaces between thoughts, where your soul dances with the eternal rhythms of growth and rest, expansion and integration, intensity and peace. Rest now in the perfect wholeness of your being, knowing that tomorrow will bring new opportunities to embody the wisdom you have received, to express the gifts you have discovered, to contribute your unique note to the symphony of conscious evolution that is always unfolding. Sleep peacefully, dream beautifully, and awaken refreshed and renewed, carrying forward the understanding that chaos and peace, intensity and calm, passion and serenity can dance together in the magnificent wholeness of who you truly are. 3 months into her 4th year of conscious transformation, Arya found herself operating from a level of mastery that would have seemed impossible during her crisis-driven years. She had developed what she privately called conscious intensity protocols, sophisticated methods for engaging with challenging experiences that fed her soul rather than depleting her energy reserves. Her morning practice had evolved into a personalized ritual that honored both her need for stimulation and her capacity for peace. She would begin each day with what she termed intentional activation, deliberately choosing one area of her life where she would engage with healthy intensity. This might involve tackling a complex case at work, having a difficult but necessary conversation, or pushing herself physically through challenging exercise that left her feeling energized rather than exhausted. The practice required extraordinary discernment. She had learned to distinguish between the clean energy of chosen challenge and the muddy energy of manufactured drama, between intensity that served growth and intensity that served old patterns of avoidance. Her nervous system had become a finely tuned instrument capable of detecting these subtle but crucial differences. At the emergency center, her colleagues had begun to study her methods with the fascination of scientists observing a new species. Dr. Martinez often brought visiting professionals to observe Arya's work, not because she handled crises differently than others, but because she had developed an uncanny ability to prevent situations from escalating to crisis level in the first place. "Watch how she moves through the space," Dr. Martinez would whisper to observers. "Notice how her presence seems to calm the entire environment without anyone consciously realizing what's happening. She's learned to broadcast stability at a frequency that other nervous systems can attune to automatically." Arya had discovered that her transformed relationship with intensity created what researchers were beginning to call regulatory contagion, the ability of one person's nervous system state to influence and stabilize others. Her embodied peace allowed people around her to access their own capacity for calm, while her comfortable relationship with intensity gave them permission to feel their full emotional range without fear of being overwhelmed. The training programs she developed had expanded internationally. Crisis intervention centers in 12 countries were implementing her methodologies, reporting significant improvements in both client outcomes and staff well-being. She had unknowingly become part of a global movement toward what mental health professionals were calling post-traumatic integration approaches that honored the intelligence within all human responses to stress. Her relationship with James had become a living laboratory for exploring the infinite possibilities that emerged when two people committed to conscious evolution shared their lives. They had developed practices for channeling their combined intensity into creative projects that served their community, relationship rituals that maintained both passion and stability, and communication protocols to transform conflict into a deeper intimacy. One evening, as they collaborated on a musical piece that would become part of a healing album for trauma survivors, James paused in the middle of their improvisation. "Do you realize," he said, "that we've created something completely new? We found a way to be together that includes both wildness and safety, both adventure and home, both individual expression and unified purpose." Their love had become a template that other couples sought to understand and emulate. Relationship counselors began referring clients to their workshops on conscious intensity in partnership, where couples learn to transform their attractions to drama into attractions, to growth, their needs for excitement into needs for authentic expression, their fears of boredom into appreciation for sustainable joy. Arya's family relationships continued to deepen as all three members evolved beyond their original trauma-bonded dynamics. Elena's artistic expression had stabilized into a prolific output of work that explored themes of healing and transformation. Her paintings now hung in galleries around the country, each piece telling a story of evolution from chaos to conscious creation. David had emerged from his academic isolation to become a sought-after speaker on the philosophy of resilience. His intellectual gifts, combined with his lived experience of family healing, allowed him to articulate complex concepts about trauma and recovery in ways that reached both academic and general audiences. The family that had once been held together by crisis was now united by shared purpose and mutual support. As Arya's mastery deepened, she began to notice phenomena that challenged her understanding of what was possible in the realm of human healing. She seemed to have developed what could only be described as quantum healing abilities, capacities for perception and intervention that operated beyond the conventional boundaries of psychology and medicine. During sessions with clients, she found herself accessing information that hadn't been explicitly shared. She would sense the presence of unresolved trauma in specific areas of a person's body, recognize patterns that connected current struggles to childhood experiences, and perceive the energetic signatures of various emotional states with startling accuracy. Dr. Patricia Williams, a Jungian analyst, had become fascinated by these developments. "What you're describing," she told Arya during one of their sessions, "sounds like what indigenous healers have always known. That consciousness can perceive and influence reality at levels that Western psychology is only beginning to acknowledge." The abilities manifested most dramatically during group sessions. Arya had developed a practice of what she called field healing, working with the collective nervous system of an entire group rather than focusing on individual participants. She would guide groups into states of shared resonance where healing could occur at multiple levels, simultaneously. During one memorable session with a group of first responders dealing with secondary trauma, something extraordinary occurred. As Arya guided the group through a meditation on transforming their attraction to crisis into wisdom, the entire room seemed to shift into a coherent energy field. Participants later reported experiencing simultaneous insights, physical sensations of healing, and profound emotional releases that continued for weeks after the session. It was like she helped us remember something we have forgotten, one participant wrote in a follow-up email. Not just individually, but collectively. Like we all suddenly understood that our attraction to emergency work wasn't pathological, but was actually our soul's way of preparing us to serve during times of great change. The quantum healing abilities extended to her work with organizational systems. Companies and institutions began hiring Arya to facilitate what they called cultural transformation intensives, processes that address not just surface-level problems, but the deeper patterns that created those problems in the first place. During these intensives, she would work with groups to identify the hidden attractions to dysfunction that kept problematic patterns in place. Organizations discovered that their tolerance for chaos often served unconscious needs for excitement, control, or identity that could be met in more constructive ways. One technology company credited Arya with preventing what would have been a devastating merger failure. By helping the leadership teams from both companies recognize and transform their unconscious attractions to competitive drama, she facilitated the creation of a collaborative culture that preserved the strengths of both organizations while generating unprecedented innovation. The quantum healing work required Arya to develop new theories about consciousness and its relationship to reality. She began to understand that what she had once called her attraction to chaos was actually an attraction to the quantum field of infinite possibility, the space where new realities could emerge from apparent disorder. She started collaborating with physicists and consciousness researchers who were exploring the intersection of quantum mechanics and healing. Their preliminary findings suggested that consciousness could indeed influence reality at quantum levels, and that individuals who had learned to navigate chaos consciously might have enhanced access to these quantum healing capabilities. By the end of her fourth year of transformation, Arya's work had begun to influence global conversations about trauma, resilience, and human potential. The World Health Organization invited her to contribute to new guidelines for trauma-informed care that would be implemented in refugee camps, disaster zones, and conflict areas around the world. Her insight that attraction to chaos often represented attraction to life force itself had revolutionized approaches to working with individuals who had been labeled as treatment-resistant or help-rejecting. Mental health professionals were learning to recognize the intelligence within apparently self-destructive patterns, leading to breakthrough healing for thousands of people who had previously been considered hopeless cases. The book she had written, Dancing with Storms, Finding Aliveness Beyond Crisis, became an international bestseller translated into 37 languages. But more importantly, it sparked a global movement of people who were transforming their relationships with intensity, discovering that their most challenging patterns often contained their greatest gifts. Support groups based on Arya's principles formed in cities around the world. These conscious intensity circles provided safe spaces for people to explore their attractions to chaos, drama, and crisis while learning to channel these attractions into creative expression, meaningful service, and authentic aliveness. The ripple effects extended into unexpected areas. Educational systems began implementing Arya's insights about intensity-seeking students, discovering that many children labeled as behavioral problems were actually high-sensation learners who thrived when given appropriate challenges and stimulation. Juvenile detention centers reported dramatic decreases in recidivism when they implemented programs based on her understanding of chaos attraction as misdirected life force. Urban planners and architects began consulting with Arya about designing environments that could accommodate the full spectrum of human nervous system needs. Cities started creating intensity zones alongside calm zones, recognizing that different people require different levels of stimulation to thrive. The entertainment industry took notice of her work as well. Film studios and game developers began creating content that provided healthy outlets for intensity seeking without promoting actual chaos or violence. Her collaboration with media creators led to a new genre of transformation entertainment that helped audiences process their own attractions to drama through vicarious experience. Perhaps most significantly, Arya's work began to influence how society understood and responded to collective crises. Emergency management agencies started implementing her principles during disaster response, recognizing that some individuals were naturally drawn to crisis situations and could be valuable assets when their gifts were properly channeled. During a major earthquake that struck the region, Arya found herself at the center of relief efforts, not as a victim or even a helper, but as a coordinator of other individuals who, like her, had learned to find their center in the eye of the storm. The response was more efficient and less traumatic for everyone involved, because it honored the natural diversity of human nervous system. Responses to emergency. The legacy she was creating extended far beyond her individual impact. She had helped birth a new understanding of human resilience that honored the full spectrum of adaptive responses to challenging conditions. The work was contributing to what social scientists were beginning to call collective post-traumatic growth, the capacity of entire communities and cultures to emerge stronger and wiser from difficult experiences. As Arya entered her fifth year of conscious transformation, she found herself experiencing what could only be described as cosmic consciousness expansion, a profound recognition that her individual journey was inseparable from the evolution of consciousness itself. The boundaries between her personal healing and the healing of the world had dissolved into something far more magnificent and mysterious. During her meditation practices in the garden that had witnessed her initial awakening, she began to perceive the interconnected web of energy that connected all beings who were engaged in similar transformation processes. She could sense, across vast distances, the presence of others who were learning to metabolize chaos into wisdom, to transform survival patterns into thriving strategies, to find aliveness beyond crisis. These perceptions weren't mystical fantasies, but practical insights that enhanced her effectiveness as a healer and teacher. She found herself able to access what felt like a collective database of wisdom, the accumulated insights of everyone who had ever learned to dance consciously with intensity. This expanded awareness allowed her to offer increasingly sophisticated guidance to people navigating their own transformations. Dr. Jung, now in her 80s and serving as an informal spiritual mentor to the growing community of consciousness explorers, helped Arya understand what was happening. You've learned to access what the ancient traditions called the Akashic Records, she explained during one of their weekly conversations. The field of information that contains all experiences of healing and growth. Your nervous system has become sensitive enough to receive transmissions from this field. The cosmic consciousness expansion manifested in Arya's work as an ability to perceive the evolutionary purpose behind individual struggles. She could sense how a person's specific pattern of chaos attraction served not only their individual development but also the collective evolution of human consciousness. This perspective allowed her to help people find profound meaning in their most challenging experiences. She began to understand that the epidemic of chaos attraction in modern society wasn't a sign of collective pathology, but rather evidence of consciousness evolving beyond outdated survival patterns. Millions of people were unconsciously seeking experiences that would expand their capacity to hold paradox, navigate complexity, and transform breakdown into breakthrough. Her role had evolved from individual healer to evolutionary midwife, someone who helped birth new possibilities for what it meant to be human. The training programs she developed began to incorporate what she called evolutionary psychology, approaches that understood individual healing within the context of species-wide transformation. The cosmic consciousness expansion also brought profound humility. Arya realized that her gifts and insights weren't personal achievements, but rather expressions of a larger intelligence working through her. She began to experience herself as a temporary vehicle for evolutionary forces that were far greater than her individual identity. This recognition transformed her approach to her work and relationships. Instead of trying to help people from a position of expertise or superiority, she learned to serve as a clear channel through which universal healing intelligence could operate. Her presence became increasingly transparent, allowing the deepest wisdom to emerge from within the people she served rather than being imposed from outside. The expansion of consciousness brought with it access to what spiritual traditions had always called unconditional love, not as an emotion or sentiment, but as the fundamental force that underlies all existence. She began to perceive every being as an expression of this love, regardless of their current state of confusion, suffering, or apparent dysfunction. This love was practical rather than sentimental. It allowed her to remain present with the most challenging individuals and situations without being overwhelmed or activated. She could hold space for people's darkness and light simultaneously, seeing their struggles as temporary expressions of eternal consciousness, learning about itself through human experience. As her consciousness continued to expand, Arya discovered that healing could occur across multiple dimensions of reality simultaneously. She developed what she privately called dimensional healing mastery, the ability to work with physical, emotional, mental, energetic, and spiritual aspects of human experience as an integrated whole. Her sessions with clients began to resemble what ancient healers would have recognized as soul retrieval processes that restored fragmented aspects of consciousness to wholeness. She learned to perceive how trauma created splits in awareness, how parts of people's essential nature went into hiding during overwhelming experiences, and how these hidden aspects could be welcomed back into conscious integration. The dimensional healing work often produced results that challenged conventional understanding of what was possible through psychological intervention. People reported spontaneous physical healings alongside emotional breakthroughs, sudden resolution of long-standing family patterns, and profound spiritual awakenings that emerged from addressing apparently mundane personal issues. During one memorable session, a combat veteran named Michael experienced what could only be described as miraculous healing. He had come to Arya after years of unsuccessful treatment for PTSD, convinced that his case was hopeless. Through the dimensional healing process, they discovered that his attraction to dangerous situations wasn't just about adrenaline or familiarity with chaos, but was actually his soul's way of seeking opportunities to practice courage and service. As Michael learned to channel his intensity seeking into volunteer, firefighting, and disaster relief work, his PTSD symptoms didn't just improve. They completely disappeared. More remarkably, he reported that his wartime experiences had transformed from sources of trauma into sources of wisdom that enhanced his ability to serve others during emergencies. "It's like she helped me remember who I really am," Michael explained to his former therapist. Not just someone who survived trauma, but someone whose soul chose those experiences as preparation for a larger purpose. The healing didn't come from getting rid of my intensity, but from understanding how to use it consciously. The dimensional healing mastery extended to working with families and communities. Arya developed techniques for healing ancestral patterns that were passed down through generations, helping families break cycles of dysfunction that had persisted for decades or even centuries. One family who consulted with her had experienced what they called a curse of chaos attraction that affected every generation. Parents, children, and grandchildren all found themselves drawn to dramatic relationships, crisis-prone careers, and lifestyle choices that created constant turbulence. Through the dimensional healing process, they discovered that their ancestors had been trauma healers during times of war and persecution, and their apparent dysfunction was actually a distorted expression of inherited healing gifts taught as the family. Learn to channel their intensity seeking into conscious service, becoming disaster relief volunteers, crisis counselors, and community organizers. The curse transformed into a blessing that benefited their entire community. The dimensional healing work required Arya to develop new models for understanding consciousness and its relationship to reality. She began to perceive human beings as multidimensional entities whose current personality was only the most superficial layer of a vast, eternal consciousness that existed across multiple planes of reality. This understanding revolutionized her approach to mental health treatment. Instead of focusing solely on symptom reduction or behavior modification, she learned to work with the eternal aspects of consciousness that remained untouched by trauma, dysfunction, or suffering. By helping people connect with these indestructible aspects of themselves, healing occurred at levels that were previously unimaginable. As Arya's abilities continued to evolve, she began to experience what could only be described as prophetic vision, glimpses of possible futures that could emerge if humanity learned to transform its collective relationship with chaos and intensity. These visions weren't predictions of inevitable outcomes, but rather previews of potential realities that could manifest through conscious choice and collective effort. In her most profound visionary experiences, she saw a world where what had once been called mental illness was understood as evolutionary pressure, consciousness seeking to expand beyond outdated patterns and structures. Crisis intervention centers had evolved into transformation catalyst centers, where people experiencing psychological emergency were supported in birthing new capacities rather than simply stabilized in old patterns. She envisioned educational systems that recognized and nurtured the gifts of high-intensity learners, providing appropriate challenges and stimulation that channeled their energy into creative expression and meaningful contribution. Children who had once been labeled as having attention deficits or behavioral problems were celebrated as carriers of evolutionary potential. Their intensity welcomed as fuel for innovation and positive change. The vision showed her communities, designed around the understanding that different nervous systems required different environments to thrive. Cities contained networks of spaces calibrated for various intensity levels, allowing people to find optimal conditions for their unique constitutional needs. The result was a dramatic decrease in both mental health crises and social dysfunction. Perhaps most remarkably, she saw glimpses of how humanity's relationship with collective crises could transform. Instead of being overwhelmed by global challenges like climate change, pandemic disease, and social upheaval, communities had learned to recognize these emergencies as evolutionary pressures that could catalyze unprecedented cooperation and innovation. Groups of individuals trained in conscious intensity navigation served as emergency response teams during collective crises. Their ability to remain calm in chaos and find opportunities within apparent disaster, helping entire populations transform breakdown into breakthrough. What had once been humanity's greatest challenges became the catalyst for its greatest evolution. The prophetic visions came with profound responsibility. Arya understood that her role was not just to heal individuals or even communities, but to help birth the new paradigms that could support these future possibilities. She began developing training programs for what she called evolutionary midwives, individuals who could help others navigate the often turbulent process of consciousness transformation. These programs attracted people from diverse backgrounds who shared common characteristics. They had all learned to find their center in the midst of chaos. They had all transformed their personal attractions to drama into attractions to growth, and they all felt called to serve the larger process. of human evolution. The network of evolutionary midwives began to have measurable impact on global systems. Their work in conflict zones helped transform ethnic and religious conflicts into opportunities for deeper understanding. Their interventions in corporate environments helped organizations evolve beyond competitive chaos toward collaborative creativity. Their presence in educational settings helped schools become laboratories for conscious human development. Arya's prophetic visions also revealed her own future service. She saw herself continuing to evolve as a teacher and healer, but also taking on a new role as what she could only describe as a consciousness architect, someone who helped design the social, educational, and healing systems that could support humanity's continued evolution. The work would require her to step even further beyond the boundaries of conventional psychology and healing into territories that integrated ancient wisdom with cutting-edge science, individual transformation with collective evolution, practical intervention with mystical understanding. As she contemplated the magnitude of what was being asked of her, Arya felt a familiar sensation, the same electric aliveness that had once drawn her to crisis and chaos. But now she recognized this feeling for what it truly was, her soul's response to being called into ever greater service to the evolution of consciousness itself. 5 years into her transformation, Arya had become something unprecedented in the modern world, a living demonstration of how human consciousness could evolve beyond the ancient dichotomy between chaos and order, between intensity and peace, between survival and transcendence. She had learned to exist in what the mystics called the middle way, but which she experienced as a dynamic dance between all polarities of human experience. Her daily existence had become a masterpiece of conscious orchestration. Each morning, she would attune to the subtle energies of her being and the world around her, sensing what combination of intensity and tranquility would best serve her growth and her service on any given day. This wasn't a rigid practice, but rather a fluid responsiveness to the ever-changing symphony of life's demands and opportunities. The emergency center had evolved under her influence into something that would have been unrecognizable to crisis intervention specialists of previous generations. Rather than simply responding to psychological emergencies, the facility had become a transformation laboratory where people experiencing what appeared to be breakdown were supported in recognizing their breakthrough potential. The waiting room itself had been redesigned based on Arya's understanding of how different nervous systems responded to various environmental conditions. Multiple zones provided different levels of stimulation, from high-energy spaces with vibrant colors and dynamic music to serene sanctuaries with soft lighting and nature sounds. People could choose the environment that best supported their particular state of consciousness during their healing journey. Dr. Martinez often brought international delegations to observe what she called the Arya method in action. Visitors would watch in amazement as situations that would have escalated into full crisis in traditional settings were transformed into opportunities for profound healing and growth. The secret, Arya had learned, was recognizing that most psychological emergencies were actually consciousness attempting to break free from outdated patterns and limitations. Her approach to individual sessions had evolved into something that resembled high art more than conventional therapy. She had developed the ability to perceive the unique frequency signature of each person's consciousness, recognizing not just their current struggles, but their evolutionary potential. Each session became a collaborative exploration of how their specific pattern of chaos attraction could be alchemized into wisdom and service. One client, a successful businessman named Robert, who had been destroying his life through compulsive risk-taking and affair after affair, discovered through their work together that his apparent self-destruction was actually his soul's rebellion against a life that had become too small for his expanding consciousness. His attraction to chaos wasn't pathological, but rather his psyche's demand for experiences that matched the intensity of his spiritual nature. Through Arya's guidance, Robert learned to channel his intensity seeking into conscious adventure. Extreme sports that challenged his limits safely, business ventures that served humanitarian causes, and eventually a complete career change that allowed him to work with at-risk youth who shared his high stimulation needs. His marriage not only survived but flourished as he and his wife learned to create excitement through mutual growth rather than mutual destruction. The alchemy of perfect balance that Arya embodied began to influence the broader culture in ways that social scientists were just beginning to measure. Divorce rates in the city had decreased significantly as couples learned to transform their attractions to drama into attractions to conscious evolution. Emergency room visits for anxiety and panic attacks had dropped as people discovered healthier ways to access the aliveness they were unconsciously seeking through crisis. Perhaps most remarkably, the city had become a magnet for what researchers were calling evolutionary migrants, individuals from around the world who were drawn to communities where their intensity and sensitivity were understood as gifts rather than pathologies. The influx of high-functioning, intensely creative individuals had transformed the local economy and culture in ways that benefited everyone. As Arya's consciousness continued to expand, researchers at the local university became interested in studying the biological changes that accompanied her psychological transformation. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a neuroscientist specializing in neuroplasticity, approached Arya about participating in longitudinal studies that might reveal how consciousness evolution manifested at the cellular level. The research findings were revolutionary. Brain scans revealed that Arya's neural architecture had undergone changes that were previously thought impossible in adult nervous systems. The areas of her brain associated with threat detection and stress response had not simply calmed down. They had been rewired to perceive intensity as opportunity rather than danger. More remarkably, her nervous system had developed what researchers called dynamic homeostasis, the ability to maintain stability while embracing constant change. Where most people's nervous systems sought equilibrium through minimizing stimulation, Arya's had learned to achieve balance through consciously engaging with optimal levels of intensity. The cellular transformation extended beyond neurological changes. Blood tests revealed alterations in her immune system that suggested enhanced resilience to both physical and psychological stressors. Her cortisol patterns had normalized in ways that indicated she was experiencing chronic ease rather than chronic stress. Despite maintaining a lifestyle that would overwhelm most people, Dr. Vasquez hypothesized that Arya represented a new stage in human evolution, what she termed Homo transcendus, a human variant, adapted not just for survival, but for conscious evolution. The implications were staggering. If Arya's transformations could be understood and replicated, humanity might be on the verge of a biological leap forward that would make possible entirely new ways of being. The research attracted international attention from evolutionary biologists, consciousness researchers, and futurists who recognized that Arya's individual transformation might be a preview of humanity's collective potential. She found herself at the center of scientific conferences, documentary films, and research projects aimed at understanding the mechanisms of consciousness evolution. But Arya remained grounded in the practical applications of her transformation. She used her collaboration with researchers as an opportunity to develop more effective training methods for others who were navigating similar evolutionary pressures. The scientific validation of her experiences helped legitimize approaches that might otherwise have been dismissed as unscientific or mystical. The cellular transformation research led to the development of what Dr. Vasquez called evolutionary medicine, healthcare approaches that supported biological adaptation to changing consciousness, rather than simply treating symptoms of evolutionary pressure. Hospitals began implementing protocols based on Arya's insights, recognizing that many physical ailments were actually expressions of consciousness seeking to expand beyond limiting patterns. In the deepest phase of her transformation, Arya began to experience what could only be described as dimensional gateway activation, spontaneous access to levels of reality that existed beyond ordinary space and time. These experiences weren't drug-induced or pathological, but rather natural expressions of consciousness that had evolved beyond conventional limitations. During meditation sessions in the garden that had witnessed her initial awakening, she would find herself existing simultaneously in multiple dimensions of reality. She could perceive the garden as it existed in the present moment, but also as it had existed throughout history, and as it might exist in various possible futures. These weren't hallucinations, but rather expanded perceptions that provided practical insights for her healing work. The dimensional gateway experiences allowed her to access what indigenous traditions had always called big medicine, healing, capabilities that operated beyond the limitations of linear time and separate identity. She could perceive the eternal, undamaged essence of every person she worked with, regardless of their current level of suffering or confusion. This expanded perception revolutionized her approach to trauma healing. Instead of focusing solely on processing past experiences, she learned to help people access the timeless aspects of themselves that had never been traumatized. By anchoring clients in their eternal nature, healing could occur instantaneously rather than requiring lengthy therapeutic processes. Dr. Chen, now approaching 90 and serving as Arya's primary mentor for navigating these expanded states, helped her understand the significance of what was occurring. "You're accessing what the ancient teachings called the Bardo realms," she explained. "The spaces between ordinary reality, where consciousness can reshape itself and its relationship to existence." The dimensional gateway activation brought with it profound responsibility. Arya realized that her expanded capabilities weren't personal achievements, but rather evolutionary gifts that were meant to serve the collective awakening of human consciousness. She began training others to access similar states, recognizing that she was part of a larger movement of beings who were pioneering new possibilities for human experience. The training process was unlike anything that existed in conventional education or therapy. Students learned to expand their identity beyond individual personality to encompass what Arya called multidimensional selfhood, awareness that included but transcended personal history, cultural conditioning, and even species identification. One student, a former military officer named Sarah, who had been struggling with what psychiatrists labeled dissociative episodes, discovered through the training that her symptoms were actually spontaneous dimensional gateway activations. Instead of medicating her experiences, she learned to navigate them consciously, eventually becoming a pioneering researcher in what she termed combat consciousness evolution. Sarah's work with other veterans revealed that many cases of what was labeled PTSD were actually evolutionary pressure consciousness, seeking to expand beyond the limitations that had allowed individuals to participate in warfare. By understanding their trauma as a transformation catalyst rather than damage, veterans could access healing resources that had been previously unimaginable. As Arya entered the 6th year of her conscious evolution, the boundaries between self and other, individual and universe, human and divine, began to dissolve in ways that would have terrified her earlier self, but which now felt like coming home to her true nature. She had reached a stage of development the mystics throughout history had described, but which few had ever achieved while remaining fully functional in ordinary reality. The dissolution of separation didn't mean losing her individual identity, but rather discovering that her individual identity was a unique expression of universal consciousness. She began to experience herself as a temporary focal point through which infinite Awareness chose to explore the particular possibilities available through her specific combination of genetics, experience, and evolutionary timing. This understanding transformed every aspect of her existence. When working with clients, she no longer experienced herself as helping separate individuals, but rather as consciousness exploring, healing through multiple simultaneous perspectives. The boundaries between therapist and client dissolved into collaborative exploration of shared evolutionary potential. Her relationship with James evolved into something that transcended conventional categories of romantic partnership. They began to experience their love as a force of evolution itself, a creative principle that used their individual uniqueness to generate new possibilities for human connection and mutual awakening. Their daily life together became a continuous meditation on unity, expressing itself through apparent diversity. Conversations flowed like rivers of consciousness exploring itself. Creative collaborations emerged spontaneously from their shared awareness, and even practical activities like cooking or cleaning became opportunities for deeper communion with the intelligence that was orchestrating their experience. The dissolution of separation manifested in Arya's work as an unprecedented ability to facilitate group healing experiences. During workshops and training sessions, participants would report feeling connected not just to Arya, but to each other, and to something larger that they could only describe as universal love expressing itself through human form. One group session with trauma survivors became legendary among those who participated, as Arya guided the group through a process of recognizing their essential wholeness beyond their traumatic experiences. Something extraordinary occurred. The entire group seemed to merge into a unified field of consciousness where individual healing became impossible to distinguish from collective awakening. Participants later described experiencing themselves as both unique individuals and as facets of a single diamond of awareness. Trauma that had seemed personal and isolated was revealed to be expressions of universal consciousness, learning about resilience, compassion, and the indestructible nature of love through apparently separate human experiences. The profound healing that occurred during that session continued to ripple outward for months afterward. Participants reported not just resolution of their own trauma symptoms, but spontaneous improvements in their relationships, careers, and overall life satisfaction. More remarkably, family members and friends who hadn't attended the session began experiencing positive changes in their own lives, as if the healing had transmitted itself through invisible networks of connection. The dissolution of separation activated what Arya experienced as omnidimensional service, the capacity to serve healing and evolution across multiple levels of reality simultaneously. Her work was no longer limited to the individual clients who sat in her office or attended her workshops, but extended to collective healing processes that were occurring across time, space, and dimensional boundaries. During her meditation practices, she would often find herself participating in what felt like cosmic healing councils, gatherings of consciousness that existed beyond physical form, but which were working to support the evolution of awareness throughout the universe. These experiences weren't fantasies, but rather practical extensions of the service she was already providing, expanded to include levels of reality that most humans never consciously accessed. The omnidimensional service manifested in her physical reality through synchronicities and manifestations that seemed to violate ordinary causation. Resources for her work would appear exactly when needed, often through chains of events so complex and perfectly timed that they could only be understood as expressions of universal intelligence supporting her mission. A multi-million-dollar foundation dedicated to consciousness research spontaneously emerged to fund her work after she had a vivid dream about the need for such support. The foundation's benefactor, a technology entrepreneur who had undergone his own consciousness transformation, contacted her within days of her dream, explaining that he had been guided in meditation to seek her out and support her research. The funding allowed Arya to establish what she called the Institute for Evolutionary Psychology, a research and training center dedicated to understanding and facilitating the next stage of human consciousness development. The institute attracted researchers, practitioners, and students from around the world who were exploring the intersection of ancient wisdom and cutting-edge science. The omnidimensional service also manifested through what Arya privately called quantum interventions, healing work that seemed to operate backward and forward through time. She would work with individuals whose healing would somehow retroactively improve their past experiences and proactively enhance their future possibilities. One remarkable case involved a woman named Jennifer, whose childhood trauma had created patterns that were affecting not only her own life, but the lives of her children and grandchildren. Through the quantum intervention process, Jennifer's healing seemed to ripple both backward through her family lineage, resolving ancestral patterns, and forward through future generations, preventing the transmission of trauma to her descendants. The mechanisms of such healing remained mysterious even to Arya, but the results were undeniable. Families reported spontaneous improvements in relationships that had been conflicted for generations. Children displayed enhanced resilience despite genetic predispositions to trauma, and even deceased family members appeared in dreams to express gratitude for healing that had somehow reached them across the boundary of death. As Arya's journey approached its culmination, she found herself embodying what could only be called the ultimate integration, a state of being that included and transcended all previous stages of her development. The woman who had once sought aliveness through crisis had become a living demonstration of how consciousness could evolve to encompass infinite possibility, while remaining grounded in practical service. Her daily existence had become a seamless flow between multiple levels of reality. She could be fully present in ordinary human activities while simultaneously participating in cosmic healing processes. She could engage passionately with individual client needs while maintaining awareness of how each interaction served the larger evolution of consciousness. The ultimate integration manifested as perfect responsiveness to whatever the moment required. Sometimes this meant providing conventional psychological support. Sometimes it meant facilitating transpersonal breakthroughs. And sometimes it meant simply holding space for mystery to reveal itself through human experience. Her relationship with intensity had evolved far beyond her original chaos addiction into something that could only be described as divine. Passion, an unlimited capacity for engagement. That was sustainable because it flowed from infinite source rather than finite personality. She could love completely without attachment, serve tirelessly without burnout, and give endlessly without depletion. The transformation had created what researchers at the Institute were beginning to call the Arya effect, measurable improvements in the consciousness and well-being of everyone who came into contact with her presence. Simply being in her vicinity seemed to activate dormant potentials in other people's awareness, catalyzing their own evolutionary processes. James often marveled at how their love had become a teaching for everyone who witnessed it. Their relationship demonstrated that romantic partnership could serve as a vehicle for mutual awakening rather than mutual dependency. That passion could coexist with peace, and that individual growth could enhance rather than threaten intimate connection. Their wedding, which took place in the meditation garden where Arya's transformation had begun, became a celebration not just of their love, but of the new possibilities for human relationship that their union represented. Dr. Chun, now 92 and serving as the ceremony's officiant, spoke words that captured the significance of what was being celebrated. We gather today to witness not just the union of two souls, but the emergence of a new template for how human beings can love each other while serving the evolution of consciousness itself. Arya and James have discovered that the highest expression of romantic love is becoming transparent to the universal love that seeks to express itself through all relationships. As the ceremony concluded and the celebration continued into the evening, Arya felt the completion of one phase of her journey and the beginning of something even more magnificent. She had learned to transform her attraction to chaos into attraction to conscious evolution, her need for intensity into capacity for infinite service, her personal healing into universal awakening. The future stretched ahead with unlimited possibility, and she faced it with the same electric aliveness that had once drawn her to crisis and chaos, but which now recognized itself as love's eternal adventure in conscious evolution.